At my dad's wedding, I found my name at the last table with the distant cousins, not family. Well, we had to prioritize, my stepmom smiled. My stepbrother sat next to my dad at the front. So I said, "Thanks for making it so easy," and walked out. Only weeks later, they would beg me to come back, because I've known for a long time that my dad isn't proud of me. It's not something he ever said outright. He's too polite for that, but it's there in the way he talks about me, or more often, the way he doesn't. When people ask about my stepbrother Ethan, my dad lights up, talks about how hard he's worked, how well he's doing in business. There's always some new milestone, some new investment, something to be impressed by. When people ask about me, there's hesitation, a polite nod, a vague, "she's doing her thing." He doesn't say much else, because in his eyes, there isn't much else worth saying. I didn't turn out the way he wanted. I didn't chase money or power. I chose a job that he thinks is beneath me. I live a life that, to him, seems small. And because of that, I've been an afterthought for years. The wedding was just confirmation of what I already knew. I wasn't expecting a big role. I wasn't expecting to be the center of attention. But I also wasn't expecting to be tucked away at the back like I barely mattered. I stood at the seating chart, scanning the names. Dad and Linda at the front. Obviously, Ethan, his wife, his business partner, and his closest friends at the head table, all placed next to my dad like they were the core of the family. My name, Table 14, buried among distant cousins I hadn't seen since childhood, people who probably wouldn't even recognize me. For a second, I thought there had to be some kind of mistake, that I'd misread the list, that maybe my name was somewhere else too. Then Linda spoke. Well, we had to prioritize. She was smiling when she said it, wine glass in hand, her voice all syrupy sweet. The kind of tone that made it sound like she wasn't saying something rude. She was just stating a fact. I looked at my dad, waiting for him to say something, to realize how this looked, but he barely reacted. He was mid-conversation with someone else, distracted. He gave me a glance, like he hadn't even thought about the seating at all, like it hadn't crossed his mind that maybe his only daughter shouldn't be sitting in the farthest corner of the room. That was it. That was the moment. Not the seating itself, not Linda's smirk, but that glance. The casual indifference, the lack of recognition that anything might be wrong, because to him it wasn't, and that's when I knew I was done trying. I smoothed out my dress, let out a slow breath, and nodded. Thanks for making it so easy. Then I turned and walked out. I didn't make a scene, I didn't slam doors or yell, I just left, and nobody stopped me. I walked straight to my car, my heels clicking against the pavement. My hands weren't even shaking. That surprised me, because for years, I thought this moment would break me. I thought I'd feel devastated, angry, maybe even guilty. Instead, I just felt relief. For once, I didn't have to wonder if I was overreacting. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I should just be grateful to be invited at all. It was real. They had shown me exactly where I stood, and for the first time, I believed them. I sat in my car for a few minutes, staring out at the parking lot, half expecting my phone to buzz. Maybe my dad realizing I was gone. Maybe my aunt asking what happened. But it was silent. They were inside drinking and celebrating. No one had even noticed. And that's when I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. I turned on my engine and drove away, and with every mile that passed, I felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for years, and I had finally put it down. The thing is, I'd been preparing for this moment for a long time. Not consciously, but in the back of my mind, I always knew it was coming. My dad and I had been drifting apart for years, even before Linda, even before Ethan became the son he actually wanted. It started with my career choice. I was a smart kid, good grades, ambitious. My dad always assumed I'd go into business, law, finance, something that mattered, something that made real money. When I told him I wanted to be a nurse, he didn't yell, he didn't argue, he just sighed, like I had just told him I was throwing my life away. "You're going to work long hours for bad pay," he said. "You'll be exhausted all the time. You're setting yourself up for struggle." I told him I didn't care, that I wanted to help people. His response, "You could help people as a doctor or a surgeon. Why would you choose the lowest option?" That's how he saw it, like I had chosen something lesser. He never supported me after that. He never asked about my classes, my training, my first job in the hospital. But when Ethan started a business, Dad invested in him. He talked about him to everyone. Ethan was building something. I was just working. It was always like that. When Ethan needed help, Dad gave it to him. When I needed help, I got a lecture about figuring things out myself. So I did. I worked through school. I took extra shifts. I covered my own rent. And still, whenever my job came up, Dad had something to say. Long shift? Well, you picked it. Still renting? You should have made better choices. Hope you like working nights forever. The worst part? I still showed up for him. When his blood pressure got bad, I was the one who checked it. When he was recovering from surgery, I was the one making sure he took his meds. When he needed a doctor, I was the one arranging appointments. And every single time, he brushed it off. It's not like you're a real doctor, or you're making too big a deal out of this. I don't need babysitting. I should have walked away then, but I didn't because I kept thinking, he's still my dad. That has to mean something. But sitting in that parking lot staring at my silent phone, I realized something. It didn't. And for the first time, I was okay with that. I didn't hear from anyone that night, not a single text. I don't know why I expected one. Maybe some last-minute damage control. Maybe a half-assed, "Where'd you go?" from my dad. A message from Linda pretending she was joking. Nothing. I went home, kicked off my heels, and ordered takeout. Scrolled through my phone like it was just a normal night. And I felt fine. Not angry, not sad, just done. But the next morning, the first message came. Aunt Jan. "Hey, are you okay?" That was how I knew people had started to notice. I ignored it. Then another. "Cousin Liam. Did something happen? I saw you leave early." Ignored. Then finally, my dad. "We need to talk." No apology. No, "I'm sorry if you felt left out." Just, "We need to talk." I left it on read. I spent the next few days waiting for the guilt to hit me. It never did. Instead, I felt lighter. I went to work, took extra shifts, had coffee with friends. I did normal things, and for the first time in years, I wasn't replaying old conversations in my head. No. Maybe I should have said this instead. No. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Just silence. It was nice. Then a week later, I got a call from my aunt. "You need to talk to your dad." I didn't say anything, just waited. She sighed. "He's in the hospital." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because, of course, he's fine. She added quickly, "But he needs help." There was not. "He wants to see you." Not. "He feels terrible about what happened." Just, "He needs help." I should have seen it coming. Turns out my dad had ignored his symptoms for too long. High blood pressure, stress, some kind of complication with his meds. Before, I would have been the one catching it early. I would have checked in, reminded him to go to the doctor, made sure he was taking care of himself. Now he was stuck in the hospital and I wasn't answering his calls. And suddenly, it mattered. The next few days were a family-wide crisis. Linda called. I ignored her. Ethan called. Ignored him too. Then Aunt Jan tried again. "Look, I get why you're upset." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" She hesitated. "You know how he is. He doesn't mean things the way they sound." I let out a breath. "Hey, let's test that." "What?" "Tell me what he meant then." Silence. Because she couldn't. Because he did mean it. Every time, every comment, every time he made me feel small, he meant it. And now he wanted me back. I got another text that night. "Dad, I need to talk to you." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I messed up." Just, "I need." I turned off my phone. A week later, he was discharged. The problem? He needed ongoing care. And guess what? That's expensive. Before, he had me. I did it all for free. Checked his blood pressure, monitored his meds, made sure he followed doctor's orders. Now he had to hire someone, and he couldn't afford it. Linda tried one last time. "I think we should put the past behind us." I almost choked on my coffee. "Oh, do you?" "Your dad is struggling. This is a family matter." I let out a short laugh. "Right, family. That's interesting, because a few weeks ago, I was sitting at the cousin table." Silence. "So which is it?" I asked. "Am I family, or am I a distant relative you can ignore until you need something?" "That's not fair. Neither was your seating chart." I hung up. I don't know what happened after that. Maybe they found someone cheaper. Maybe they figured it out on their own. All I know is that they stopped calling, and I haven't heard from them since. They stopped calling for a while. I thought that was the end of it, that they'd figure something out, or that my dad would finally accept that I wasn't coming back just because it was convenient for him. Then Linda showed up at my job. It was a slow afternoon at the clinic. I was finishing up paperwork when I heard a familiar voice at the front desk. "I'm here to see my stepdaughter. It's urgent." I closed my eyes, took a breath. Linda. The receptionist was already telling her that she needed an appointment, that personal visits weren't allowed during shifts. But Linda had that polite but pushy way of speaking that always got her what she wanted. I stepped out before she could make a scene. "What are you doing here?" I asked, arms crossed. She smiled like we were old friends. "I just wanted to talk." "We already did. Over the phone, remember?" Her smile twitched. "This isn't about me. Your father—" I held up a hand. "No, you don't get to bring him up like that's going to change anything. He's not doing well." I let out a short laugh. "Yeah, I know. That's what happens when you ignore your health for years." She sighed. "He's getting worse. We can't afford full-time care, and you should have prioritized better." Her eyes flickered. She knew exactly what I meant. "This isn't the time for grudges," she tried. "He's your father." Silence, because there was nothing else to say. She wanted me to feel guilty, to suddenly remember my place and step back in like nothing had happened. But I wasn't that person anymore. "If he needs care, hire someone," I said. "If you can't afford it, ask Ethan. He's the successful one, right?" Her jaw tightened. "He's busy." I almost laughed again. "Yeah, that's what I thought." I turned to leave. She grabbed my wrist. "You owe him," she hissed, voice low so no one else could hear. And there was the real reason she was here. I pulled my hand back. "No, I don't." Then I walked away. I thought that was the last of it. It wasn't. A week later, my dad called. I almost didn't pick up, but part of me was curious. I answered. Silence for a second, then, "Hey." I leaned against the counter. "What do you want?" He exhaled. "Linda said she talked to you." "She did." More silence, then, "I think we should talk in person." I laughed. "Oh, now you want to see me?" He ignored that. "Come by the house. We'll have dinner. Just us." I glanced at the clock. "You know, if you'd asked me that a year ago, I would have been so excited." More silence. "But I think we both know this isn't about dinner." He sighed. "Just come by." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The next evening, I went to the house. It was weird being back. Nothing had changed, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It hadn't for a long time. Dad was already at the table when I walked in. The smell of takeout filled the room. He hadn't cooked. He never did. I sat down. For a few minutes, we ate in silence. Then finally, he spoke. "So how's work?" I almost laughed. "You don't care about my job, Dad." He winced. "That's not true." "Really? Because last time I checked, you thought it was a waste." He rubbed his temple. "Look, I didn't ask you here to argue." "Then why am I here?" He hesitated, then finally got to the point. "I need your help." There it was. I put my fork down. "You mean you need free medical care?" "I wouldn't put it like that." "How would you put it?" He shifted in his chair. "I just thought, since you know all this stuff, maybe you could save us money." He sighed. "Why are you making this so hard?" I blinked. "You know what's funny? That's exactly what I used to think. Every time I helped you, every time I looked after you when no one else did, and you still treated me like I wasn't good enough." His expression tightened. "That's not fair." "No." I gestured around the room. "Where was this concern at the wedding, when Linda sat me in the back like an afterthought? When you let her?" He didn't answer. I shook my head. "You don't want a daughter? You want a free nurse." "That's not true." "Then what is it?" I leaned forward. "What do you actually want from me, Dad?" He opened his mouth, then closed it because he didn't have an answer. That was the last time I saw him. He texted a few more times. I ignored him. Then the messages stopped. A few months later, I heard from my aunt that he finally hired someone, a real nurse, one that charged by the hour. And guess what? He could barely afford it. Ethan didn't help. Linda complained about the cost, but refused to take care of him herself. Me, I was exactly where I wanted to be. 1 year later, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was short. "Dad's in the hospital again. Thought you should know." I stared at the screen for a long time, then finally, I blocked the number, and I didn't look back. 2 years later. I hadn't thought about my dad in a long time. Not in a real way, not in a maybe I should check in kind of way. Every once in a while, I'd hear something through family. His health wasn't great, he was struggling with money, Linda was stressed. But none of it was my problem anymore, and I was fine with that. Actually, I was doing better than fine, without all the stress, the constant pressure to prove myself, the exhaustion of trying to be accepted by people who didn't care. My life got easier. My job was still tough, my shifts were still long, but I liked my life. I had real friends, people who actually valued me. I traveled. I started putting money aside for things I cared about. Meanwhile, my dad had exactly what he had chosen: a wife who only stuck around because she had nowhere better to go, a son who was too busy with his investments to even return his calls, and a whole lot of medical bills. I didn't know how bad things had gotten until my cousin Liam reached out. I know you don't want to hear this, but it's bad. I sat on my couch staring at the text. Liam and I were never that close, but he'd always been one of the few people in the family who actually noticed things. I debated ignoring it. Then, against my better judgment, I typed back, "What's bad?" "Your dad. He's completely broke. He had to sell the house." I blinked. That house wasn't just some random property. It was the one he had kept after the divorce, the one he and Linda had remodeled over the years. He loved that house. "Where is he now?" I asked. "Some small rental. He's been asking everyone for money." I let out a breath. There was no concern, no apology, just another attempt to get something out of me. "Let me guess," I typed. "He told you to reach out." "No," Liam admitted. "Linda did." "Of course she did." 2 days later, Linda called me. I didn't answer. Then she left a voicemail. "I know you're still upset, but we need to talk." No, we didn't. I deleted the message. Another month later, I got another text, this time from a number I didn't recognize. "Dad's in the hospital again. Thought you should know." I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't ask what was wrong. Didn't ask if he was okay. I just blocked the number. 3 months later, I ran into Ethan. I was at a coffee shop, waiting in line, and suddenly there he was. Expensive suit, designer watch, the kind of confidence that only comes when you've never had to struggle for a single thing in your life. He spotted me before I could turn away. "Well, look who it is," he said, flashing a grin like we were old friends. I gave him a polite nod. "Ethan." He glanced at my scrubs. "Still doing the whole nurse thing, huh?" I exhaled through my nose. "Still avoiding Dad's calls?" That wiped the grin off his face. "What do you want me to do?" he said after a moment. "He put himself in this position." I tilted my head. "He gave you everything, and now you can't even throw him a little help." Ethan scoffed. "You didn't help either." "Yeah," I said, "because he treated me like garbage. What's your excuse?" Ethan didn't answer, because he didn't have one. 6 months later, I found out from Liam that my dad had moved into a nursing facility. A bad one, the kind that barely meets health standards, but was the only place he could afford. "Ethan really won't help?" I asked. "Nope, won't even visit." I nodded. That sounded about right. I thought about going once, just to see what he looked like now, if he'd changed. I didn't, because I already knew how it would go. He wouldn't apologize. He wouldn't even acknowledge that he had done anything wrong. He would just expect me to fix things, to step back into my old role. And I wasn't doing that, ever again. A year later, I was sitting in the break room at work when the news came on. A business segment, a feature on Ethan's latest company. He was being interviewed in some sleek, high-rise office, talking about expansion, investments, all the money he was making. I stared at the screen, because this guy, this millionaire, couldn't even spare a dime to help the father who had given him everything. And my dad had chosen him. He had prioritized him. And now he was sitting in a rundown nursing home, struggling alone, while Ethan thrived. While I thrived. And that's when it hit me. I had won. Not in a petty, vengeful way, but in a real, deep way. I had built something for myself, a life that was mine. And my dad had built his own future too. He had built it on favoritism, dismissing me, undervaluing me. And now he was living the consequences of that. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't karma, it was just exactly what he had created. I got one last text from Liam. "Dad passed away last night, just thought you should know." I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't cry, I didn't feel relief either, I just felt nothing. And that told me everything I needed to know. I typed back, "Thanks for letting me know." Then I put my phone down and got ready for my shift. Because unlike my dad, I still had people to take care of.